Hello and welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Dawn Campbell, your IAPC&M host, and I'm delighted to be with you today and joined by Lindsay. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce Lindsay's surname. I know it's Dutch, so hello, Lindsay. Perhaps you could say it for us.
Well, so I'm from the UK, but I am married a Dutch guy and I'm living in the Netherlands, and you pronounce that as Uittenbogaard, which confuses everybody. So it's not just you, don't worry about it.
Good. Well, Lindsay is the founder of Mirror Mirror, which is a training and it's also a book. So we really must get you on our authors interview series, Lindsay, and have your book uploaded to our book review club as well. And as those of you who are regulars on my masterclasses, you'll know I like to, rather than regurgitate the bio that is on social media and out there for everybody to see, I like to go a little bit deeper and find out something personal. And what I found out about Lindsay is that she's attracted to adventure. And this has translated into her visiting more than 50 countries. And interestingly, she's done 2 parachute jumps and also jumped off the world's highest bungee jump. Where was that, Lindsay?
That was in Port Elizabeth in South Africa.
Wow. And both your hips are still working fine?
They're still working fine. Just when you do a bungee jump, keep your eyes closed. Otherwise, you have risk of eyeballs kind of coming out of it. It was extremely scary and I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, wow. Okay. When I was a little bit younger, I was tempted, but not now. And you're also interested in comedy and set up a comedy club. I must put you in touch with Claudia, one of our comedic coaches. And you participated in and was fired.
No,
you
you can if you want to. It's just go ahead.
Yeah, from one of my favorite TV shows, The Apprentice, 2004. What was that like?
Well, my excuse is that it was the first series,
yeah,
and I had no idea what it would be like, and I don't like the way it's turned out, actually. But it was a mixed bag. It was really exciting and really fun, but also really disappointing and manipulative and confusing. So I wouldn't recommend that either.
I'm sure there's a lot goes on behind the scenes that we don't see.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to hand over to you. So if everybody would like to grab their CPD logs and be prepared to take lots of notes and learn about how only coaches can lead alignment, I will hand over to you now, Lindsay, please.
Thank you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through a presentation, but come out occasionally for a little bit of feedback and discussion. So whoever's on the call, I would really like to just involve you in sort of what's your reaction, what are your thoughts and experiences. So this is actually a twofold approach. I'll explain what it's all about, but I want to start off with the scope of alignment, because a lot of people aren't aligned on that. So let's get that straight. So a lot of times people talk about level 1, which I'm describing here, and it's about alignment of enterprise to the strategic intent. It's about aligning the parts of the organization, if you like. So we're talking about strategy and purpose, capability, and that's absolutely important. Of course, it's fundamental. But what I'm talking about here is the second 2 layers, which is about alignment of people to the enterprise or the organization, and alignment of people with each other. And the reason why that's so important these days is because of a whole load of things that I'll go into now. So there are 3 points in this slide that I've heard the phrase fracturing organizations, but more hybrid and remote working means that it's actually more difficult for people to connect with each other. There's less of the reading of body language, less opportunities to check things out with each other. There's ongoing change and complexity, and you could say more complexity. It's difficult for people to get a handle on what's going on in most organizations. I think even when you're working in a small organization, the whole challenge of who did what happened, why did they do it, what are we doing next, and how do we process all of that even for small companies, that takes a lot of communication between individual people, and in larger organizations, it's even more difficult. And then a lot of leaders want to empower people to make decisions, but they don't know if everyone's on the same page. It's much more tempting to just want to tell people what the direction is and hope that lands. But it's not so simple, of course. There's the strategic frame that people need to be informed about, but then there's how do they interpret that to their work, and how are they going to collaborate in delivering that? So I just want to ask people to come off mute at the moment, and I'm going to go to this next piece, which is, what alignments do you see in your work, or indeed in your experience? How do these kind of alignment issues show up? And I'm going to just be really mean and kind of pick on people, actually, if you could just come out of mute. I hope there's no feedback on the line, because we did get some of that at the beginning, didn't we? But let's hope there's none of that there. Do either of you want to just sort of say whether you recognise that misalignment is even an issue, how you've seen that?
Definitely. I think my work in health and social care, it's about cultures. I think, work cultures have a big impact. And I think that's about how aligned the workers are with the work, the company, and what the company's doing. And I think the communication is a really important one. I think very often, managers can think that the workers or the rest of the team are kind of knowing what's going on, but they don't. And they definitely can be. If you haven't got good policies and procedures, or if they're not kind of discussed with the teams, then of course you get poor practice. You'll get people interpreting what they think, certain ways of working are. And I think that can cause a bit of disconnection. And I think, that can then cause a really different work culture. And I think that's really relevant to do with alignment and non-alignment, because I really think when I've seen and I've worked in cultures where I wouldn't call them very good cultures, it's because there's no alignment whatsoever between the work people are supposed to be doing. There's no teamwork, there's no support, there's no kind of togetherness. So I think not being in alignment can cause a lot of issues, and it can be embedded, and cultures can take a long time to kind of unravel, get to the bottom of, and start building back up again. But that's kind of my experience or my thoughts.
That's great. I mean, what do you have a reaction to that, Vivian, or your own reaction?
Well, it's been a long time since I've worked in an organisation. I coach owner-managed businesses, so but actually alignment, sometimes they themselves as individuals are completely out of alignment with who they are, what they do. So probably got a different take, which is possibly not what you're talking about today. I didn't know if this was for me. I thought I'd just dip in. Not entirely sure it is. It's all owner-managed business women basically who are starting up and scaling. And
so when you're, because when I'm talking about organizations, I guess I'm just talking about businesses, whether they're private sector, public sector, whatever sizes. So you're talking about one-man bands, are you, or
owner managed? Yeah, all just completely. They may have some kind of freelancers, or some people they've outsourced to, but essentially they've very rarely got team members. And then mainly for them, their issue then is about how to manage, train, select, lead. And so, yeah, I think the last thing that my clients are thinking about is this, because they're too busy thinking, how do we get the right person? Can I afford them? It's normally financially based rather than alignment based. So their priority and value set is usually quite different, sadly, actually. Having had various experiences of bringing in the wrong team members that weren't aligned with me or my business, I understand the value of this, of course. But yeah, I tend not to coach in businesses, as it were. I'm only the owners.
Yeah. What about you, Sue? Are you coaching inside organizations, small, medium size, or large?
I've got some clients who are in a range of different industries, so I'm coaching individuals, and certainly what I've seen, it becomes difficult when the managers and the sort of the kind of the people higher up in the organization, whether it's a school or a company or whatever, have one expectation, and they're very much driven on sort of results and not cutting corners, but cutting costs and streamlining, and when people leave, not replacing, versus kind of people who I've been coaching, who are sort of like one lady springs to mind, who's very concerned with kind of looking after her team on a sort of an emotional and well-being level, as well as, you know, coaching them to do the best they can do at work. So she's really not in alignment with the company values higher up, and that's caused her certainly a lot of stress. So that's one thing. And then my background is 20 years in global IT projects. There's an awful lot of misalignment there, particularly because I've been a lot on the training teams and things. And when you're wanting to kind of deliver value and the best experience to your clients, who are the people who are going to use the system, and we're talking hundreds of users around the world, you know, and training is always the thing that gets cut back all the time, you know. It's where they can save money. So those are just some examples of where you've got real kind of misalignment between, you know, people who are in touch with their clients and want to deliver a certain experience, and then kind of people higher up really who pull the purse strings, you know.
And I think we're talking about people don't necessarily have to be employed, obviously, to be considered part of the team, but certainly it applies to any size of organization where there are problems. And I'm just going to go back to the slides now, because the problems that I'm talking about are things like here, you know, things take longer and cost more than expected. Collaboration isn't going as it should. These are the kinds of symptoms, if you like. People aren't on the same page is a really familiar term that people use. Silo working, everybody's swamped, almost feel like they're running around a little bit like headless chickens because they're not properly connected, things moving so fast. But the actual impacts, I think, of misalignment that can affect any team are ultimately, you know, these ones, and you've already mentioned sort of some of them, but you know, there's not so much productivity, of course, and it's very obvious stuff, because if you haven't got decisions and actions that are taking place from different people lining up, then of course it's not going to be as productive, and there's going to be misdirected efforts that have got to be fixed. It actually doesn't help morale. It's very frustrating to work in these environments. It's a lost opportunity. So the point on this slide is basically the impacts of misalignment are really big on organizations, but perhaps up to now it's that people haven't really known what to do about it. You know, everybody's just doing their best, I think, and we use conversation to try and sort it out. You know, what did they say and what do you think and where did that come from, etc., etc. But that's not enough, and this is why we're having this presentation, because you know, there are different ways to deal with it. And I think the challenge that we can summarize is that you can't just put people with the right knowledge and tools together and expect them to just wonderfully produce magic teaming. They actually have a challenge to integrate their perspectives and to collaborate as a single unit. And it's all because of the fact that we're just people. I mean, this is human. It's a human to have to make assumptions to join the dots. It's human to have your own interpretation of what's going on according to the way that your experiences and beliefs and preferences, and then you've got biases which are driving you in a different direction because that's what you want things to be like, or not, and motivations. So, but an example of how this might play out is, you know, this statement might come out of the senior leadership team. We're responsive to customer needs, and people will use their interpretations and their biases to determine what that means. And you've probably heard of, you know, social constructionism out of the 70s, which is a theory out of the research that basically says that people construct meaning together in language. So actually, you know, if you're in the boardroom and you've been discussing what being responsive to customer needs means, then there's a whole kind of backdrop to what that means that won't be carried with it when those words are printed and sent out, perhaps in an email or from line managers, etc. And I think the current situation is that there's more complexity and change, and employee engagement of just sending that message is just insufficient. And any other kind of technical tools like Trello or social networks are are great to kind of help connect people, but they don't align. They're not actually doing the job of alignment. And in the future, it's just going to get worse. You're not even going to meet people that you're going to work with in the future, or your clients. There's short-term staff, freelance staff, dispersed teams, diverse teams. The whole climate is, you could say, becoming a bit more disconnected, and the need to align is getting greater. So I want to just go on to, let's just reflect for a second on the questions that people are asking, that your clients are asking. And on a generic level, they're kind of starting to ask, how does it work when you're talking about academic research? So they've always been asking academic research, how do things work? How does this work? How do we do this? Psychometric testing is, of course, all about, well, how do we work? Performance data is about how did we do yesterday, but alignment, or what we would call team reality reporting, is about how we can align for tomorrow. And so the reason I'm going into this is because there are different ways of handling this, but the higher up this tree, this sort of like this image you get, it's more about how relevant and how much speed to action does this take? How quick does it take some of these interventions to make a difference? And the academic research takes ages, but this team reality reporting really is in the moment. Now, I'm just going to ask you, I think my doorbell's rung and the thing doesn't work, but I'm going to ask you to talk amongst yourselves in response to the question, how do you see alignment being handled? Just for 2 seconds, and I'll be back in a minute. But there's lots of different ways that people try to handle alignment. So give me 1 second. I'm going to go on mute. But please come off mute, and also Dawn, chip in if you like. But how do people currently deal with alignment?
Well, I have to say this is a new subject for me, because we've got a new team. David and I have been running the IAPC&M, not exactly solo, but with a very, very small team for quite a few years. And this year the team has really grown, and hopefully Sue is going to be joining us. This is an important issue for us to learn, to make sure that we're, as volunteers, all in different countries, all doing our own thing, that we are aligned. So that's why I'm on the call to learn about it. You were super quick, Lindsay.
That's just has to press a button outside. But it's a real challenge when you get people working in different countries remotely. It's easy to think, aren't we modern? We're just, we can connect whenever we want, but it's super challenging. Slightly different nuances of language. People talking at cross purposes, but not realizing it.
I've also realized that being a really nice person isn't enough. So when you interview somebody and you think, they want to do this role, they seem really nice, it's not enough to be aligned. Niceness isn't enough to be aligned, is what I'm saying, if that makes sense.
I do remember working on again, in a sort of in a managerial role on global IT projects. One of the biggest things that impacted was the different cultures. So when I was working with people in offshore, you get a lot of technical developers and people offshore in India and places like that. You have to handle meetings and things with them very differently, because they're not comfortable about chipping in, about speaking up. A lot of the time they're very shy. Same with working with people in some of the Asia Pac countries. And there was no training given at all about that. You were just sort of expected to kind of know it, pick it up as you went along. It wasn't always. So you've got an imbalance in any meetings and discussions and things like that. There was an imbalance if you weren't careful.
And I think that's my point, really, is that having worked in large organizations myself, there isn't really an approach to alignment other than people trying to sort it out in conversation and hoping that they, and if they felt comfortable, well, I know what's going on. It's very difficult for them to appreciate that other people don't have that same understanding. So It's really about the meaning that is shared between people as opposed to what each person individually thinks. If you see what I mean. And that's where I'm getting around to my next piece. So I'm going to go back to the slide sharing again. And just take a look at the research before we come to, well, what can we do about it? I just spoke about social constructionism, which is about the fact that meaning is handled through language to create shared reality. And I'll give you an example of that and where it's not shared. We worked with the University of Upper Austria with a university project team because the professor wanted to bring in some learning about alignment and leadership and communication. And these were 8 master's students in healthcare and public management, and their objective was to translate, I don't know if you've ever heard of this concept, but to translate a co-living housing concept where students share accommodation with elderly people. And at the time, it was running in Vienna, and the objective was to take it to Linz. But the professor saw that the team was kind of having really difficult conversations and they weren't making much progress. So, what's underneath this? And one of the questions that we asked, so we go in, we ask questions and we compare the responses. And the way that we take the data is anonymous, so people can say whatever they want. We actually don't really care who says what. But the question we asked was, what's the purpose of your team? And the responses that we got back were, 1, to see if elderly people can live with younger people, okay? 2, to develop a new concept for co-living in Linz. And 3, to find out if the concept from Vienna works in Upper Austria. Now, they're not really quite the same thing. And if those people are talking about, well, what do we need to do next then? If they're not actually aligned on that fundamental purpose, what they think needs to happen next is not really going to be the same. And that's where people will be like, well, what, why are they saying that? Shouldn't we be, but, and that's where conversations start to get a bit confused. It's just a bit of an example there. I'm just going to cover the other research concepts that sprung out of us from the multitude of research concepts out there. And the other one is about team effectiveness, because alignment isn't just about what people think. It's the learning behaviors that they use. And learning behaviors in areas of psychological safety, there's these 5 areas: interdependence, task cohesion, group potency, and learning behaviors itself. If they use behaviors based on those principles, they can become more aligned. So learning behaviors define the extent to which people are able to be aligned. So for example, if you're listening to somebody in conversation, but you're not really open to what they're saying because your mind is distracted, or you just have a different opinion, you're not learning from them. So how can you possibly hope to align with them if you're not really open to what they're saying? I know it sounds very obvious, but another one might be if you don't believe that the team goals come first, if you're not looking at it from a we mentality, but you've only got your own goals to look out for, then why would you even be incentivized to learn from other people about what you're doing together with them? So I'll come back onto that later. The interesting bit from neuroscience that we all know probably is that without full explanations, consciously or unconsciously, we will just create assumptions, and they may be wrong or right. So for example, you walk into an office, the windows are open, it's first thing in the morning, and you're thinking, oh God, somebody's left the windows open all night long. You look around, are there any laptops stolen? No, it looks like it's okay. Thankfully, it must have been, I don't know, Derek who left the windows open last time. So I'll come back to this. Conflicts in the workplace occur because of stories people have made up about what's happening and why, and used as the basis of actions. So Natasha walks back in and says, oh, I just popped out for coffee. Here you are. So it wasn't Derek at all. It was Natasha. She'd already been in before you. It's just that she wasn't in the office at that time. Now, that's a very obvious one, and you would discover that. You would think, oh, okay, that's the case. I mean, who knows? Maybe Derek did leave the windows open and she didn't say anything, whatever. But the point is, with all of the invisible things going on in business all the time, the scope for people to jump to assumptions about things, but not discover when they're wrong, is huge, because you don't have somebody showing you whether it's wrong or right. You just have outcomes. And you have no way to track back what what was really behind those outcomes. So the very last piece of research here is that virtual teammates are 2.5 times more likely to perceive mistrust and incompetence and broken commitments, and take 5 to 10 times longer to address them when working remotely, because you don't have that in-person, you know, when's the right moment to say this, or actually, can I look them in the eye? Because you're probably not even looking them in the eye. You're not looking at the camera on your laptop. You're looking at their image. You know, it's very, very different. So not only do we have people misinterpreting things, but they don't necessarily have the behaviors to be able to align. They're jumping to assumptions. This leads to loads of conflicts, and everybody's going to spend a long time dealing with them. So I suppose I would say that really we've got to the point where conversation alone is not going to get this sorted out. So the opportunity then, and this is where I come into, well, what can we do about it? By the way, the book hasn't actually been written yet, but Dawn, I will contact you as soon as it is. This is a diagnostic tool and a coaching process that I'm going to describe to you. And there is training for coaches, not on coaching, but on how to run an alignment process. So the opportunity here is to build better shared reality, to support teams in doing that as a coaching process. Now, I'll just go straight to the diagram on the right hand of the screen here, because the old-fashioned way to look at teams is that, you know, the leader says the leader has to engage them. And that's strictly not true, because they have to engage themselves. A leader cannot make someone be engaged. Something has to be present for somebody to feel like they are engaged. And that, I would say, is the basis of that is alignment, because how can people possibly be engaged when they have different interpretations of, or they're not connecting or collaborating properly to deliver together? So if they have the basis of alignment, which is a shared understanding on what's going on and how they're delivering, then they're more likely to get engaged, which will allow them to collaborate and become more effective. So you could define misalignment as dissonance between people. They haven't really rounded stuff out. And you can define alignment as coherence between people. So the process of getting to that point is about inclusivity. It's about revealing where the gaps are, because you can't possibly align unless you know where the gaps are. It's about people building clarity and acceptance about what is. It's about improving engagement in the process, as opposed to only trying to improve engagement as an outcome from one person to another. It's about increasing ownership of people taking part in their learning process to align, and mitigating against these risks of misalignment to start with. And so the way that we do that is in 2 parts. The first part is a diagnostic. And like I said, when we went to that team in Upper Austria, we basically asked them to share their perspectives with us separately. And then we compared those perspectives to spot the common ground and differences. Now, when you do that across a whole system at work, you end up with a report that shows where the gaps are. And that is gold when it comes to where do we need to have a conversation to align. And it's only done insofar as to open the coaching conversation. So you can try to have a team alignment process without sufficient understanding of the gaps, or you can try to identify them yourself, but which a lot of coaches do, either with their own surveys or interviewing people to start with. You know, and you probably would spot a lot of those gaps, or you would at least become aware of some of them. But what Mirror does is a comprehensive and systemic diagnostic to reveal the full suite of alignment gaps, so that people can choose which ones are priorities for them to discuss, and so that they know that they have gone through a discovery process to understand what's the scope of the discussion. Now, the dialogic part is the coaching bit, because when teams are faced with evidence of alignment gaps in data, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, it's very difficult for them. They're all very subjective to their own context. They're all in it. But it's very difficult for them to actually deal with alignment in conversation on their own, because they can so easily get stuck in the weeds. You know, what happened before? Well, I don't know, because I thought he said, oh yeah, but this was last time when, but before the process was, and you can get into this huge look back discussion that's just not productive at all. And the challenge for the coach is to talk to people about what is the current situation and what needs to change in order to improve the results. So the scope of the alignment diagnostic is how the strategy relates to the work of the team, what developments affect their work, how team behaviors influence their work, and how well they're supported to deliver. So I'll just go on to show you a bit of alignment stuff. So we split it into cognitive and behavioral alignment gaps. So for example, if we ask this team here, what's your main goal for the coming 12 months? The questions, by the way, are not all qualitative, but where they are qualitative, we group the meanings so that they can be represented visually. So it's to improve performance. That's one response. To meet our financial targets. Yes, that's kind of something to do with performance. To regain profitability and growth. I guess that's related. To reignite the organization. Okay, that's on a different level, could be related. Might need to understand, inquire a bit more about that. Or to work efficiently together. So two of those are a kind of bit disconnected from the first three, as we can see from up here. You've got most people talking about profitability, 50%. So I wouldn't say that there was that much misalignment, but it might be worth revisiting what is the team goal in this particular case. What's the main purpose of the team? We've had a look at one of those already. To lead the company, to set direction, to steer the company, to steer the delivery. Well, they probably need polishing up because, that's just the purpose of any leadership team. What is the purpose of the team? Not how are you going to achieve it? So I would say as a team coach, you would probably want to look at that again, because to lead the company isn't a purpose. That's just the role of leadership. So again, you can reading the texts here is interesting to see, well, what are they thinking? Is that right? You don't have to have the answers as a coach, but you do have to be able to liaise with the team leader or whoever is briefing them to figure out, does this match what it's supposed to be? So the coach has an intermediary role then between the team and the team leader as regard to the strategic frame. But let's go on to another piece. So here we looked at a few teams, and here are some real results from teams. And this is back in January 2020 in Hong Kong. And the lowest behavior scores I've highlighted here because they're quite interesting. The orange bar, by the way, is the average score for the team. And the shaded area underneath it is the spread of scores. So you can see, for example, positive approach to work. There's no gray area underneath it. So it was a unanimous 75%. So they're completely aligned on the fact that they mostly have a positive approach to work. Great. But the bits to worry about are usually in the lowest behavior scores, because do they see that there's clarity on direction and remit? 21% average, quite a spread of scores there. That's just that average score on its own is flags up the need for a facilitated discussion, I think. Sufficient reflection on progress. This is where 38%, they obviously want more because the way that they're reacting here, it's low. So I don't know whether they review progress or reflect on progress every quarter or every month. Not really that important for the coach. The fact is they don't think they do it enough for their situation. And tolerant of mistakes. That's kind of quite interesting. And we went to another team in London soon after that, and we had similar results in the bottom 5 behaviors. Granted, a lot more misalignment, but higher scores in general. This was actually a single team. So when we're talking about the single team scenario, usually their results are higher because there's less complexity and change. But it was the same 3 results. And then we went to a global team. And again, these came up. So we were querying our data. Is this correct? What's going on here? But especially with remote teams, here's another one from Romania. Tolerant of mistakes. These are the things that trip people up in remote teams. Now, this isn't hard data because we haven't got enough data sets yet, but it is strong anecdotal evidence for the fact that these things usually need addressing in teams. So as a team coach of alignment, you would probably be talking to them about getting better clarity on the direction, what could they be doing differently to reflect on progress better? And in this case, they needed to be more tolerant of mistakes. And so the questions for the coach that the coach would pose the team would be, what do you need to do differently in order to change this score? Is this score important enough for you to just spend time discussing it even? Somebody might say, well, we could meet more frequently. Or somebody might say, well, we could outline our thoughts before we meet and circulate them so that we don't have to do that in the call, etc., etc. And it's all of these little changes that people could commit to, which would be alignment in this case, that would help to change the results, which would make them more effective. So again, there's a few more examples of different teams here. But alignment as a process is something that I wanted just to talk through with you briefly now. So it's not black and white. It's not as if they're aligned or they're misaligned. It's a continuum, of course. And in this diagram, alignment is at the top, misalignment is at the bottom, and there are all of these degrees in the middle. And let's just look what it means here. So number one would be like full disagreement on the content or conflict on the way forward. Can be both. Slightly higher up that continuum, you've got the kind of divergence. There are different perspectives, and they don't really all match. They're not in complete disagreement, but it's not really tight enough. Convergence would mean you've got more alignment, and total alignment isn't necessarily just agreement, but it can also, like I said, be just consensus on the way forward. Now, interestingly enough, the more the diversity that you've got in the room, the more perspectives in the room, the more that you're going to be down here, which, according to Amir Goldberg, Associate Professor of at Stanford, the successful teams balance being in this phase with this phase, because it's good to be down here when you're assessing your options. Let's get the diversity out. Let's hear everybody's points of view. Let's really find out if by matching perspective A with perspective B gives us something better with C. Let's discover that. But once that conversation's been had, the team has to move up here to have less diverse points of view by either agreeing or agreeing to disagree and find a consensus. And so that's the kind of overall thing with alignment. And I talked about this earlier, but there's the frame, and then there's what's happening within the frame. Now, the reason why the coach is important here is because the line manager is involved in setting the frame, of course. Let's assume there is a line manager. Of course, some teams are self-managed these days, but there is a frame in which the team has been hired to deliver to. And this is a briefing role. Now, you can't expect a manager all of a sudden miraculously to turn into a facilitator or a coach and start helping people align, because you cannot tell people to align. They have to do it on their own terms. It has to be a dialogue process. That's, of course, the social constructionism thing. So a line manager who's taking a message down and setting the frame isn't going to start telling people how to align. That has to be facilitated, because people have to discuss for themselves, okay, how are we going to play within that space in order to deliver to it? I mean, if they are just going to be told to do that, they're probably going to be turned off completely. That's one thing. But the other thing is that who knows what to tell them to do? They only should know what they need to do, because they're the experts in the role. That's what they've been hired for. So the reason why a coach has to be there is because the line manager is subjective themselves, and they probably don't have the skills. So it does take an external person to lead this process. There are a few different types of gaps, alignment gaps, that can occur. We've talked about perception gaps mainly, but the information gaps, I mean, literally people can just need to know something. That's the quickest way to plug a gap, is if it's an information gap. Well, let's go and get that information, or tell them when we are going to. Could be about the way the process is run. There's something missing. It's not suiting their needs. What we call anti-team gaps is a bit like the dark side, where there are gaps because people aren't serving the team. They're serving their own objectives. And that creates a gap, of course, because then it's not their objective. It's not, they don't have a shared objective there, or at least they're not playing to it. So these things can all kind of come up. And I'm just going to give you the basics now of the alignment process, because this is what's the relevant bit to coaches, is how does the alignment process work with a coach then? And this is the framework that we use. So first, people can be asked to classify the gaps that they're seeing in the data. Second, they can be asked to prioritize them. Is it worth looking at? Then they can be asked to explore them and go into groups or whatever else. You can also do it online. So not looking back in terms of who caused it or why, but just defining that gap. What does that look like? What does that look like in our work? If we were to, for example, not be free to raise difficult issues and questions, how does that show up? Well, it basically means that when somebody thinks something, they just don't say it, for example. And then talk about what needs to change to get a different outcome. So how could we get over that? Because if they believe that alignment leads to team effectiveness, then getting over that gap is the route to becoming more effective and high performance. And all the time in this discussion, it's interesting to capture what emerges. And there's only 5 things that can emerge. More questions, more ideas, feelings, actions, and feedback. And some of them you can align on to in the group, in the session, and some of them can be parked. And that's a form of alignment as well, of course, because you're having people align on what they're going to do about that later. So, and that's fine. You will not be able to close every alignment gap. But the way that they're closed is in these ways. They can either get the clarity, get the information that they're looking for, build a bridge between 2 different perspectives, which is the kind of real aha moment. Oh, if that's what you were thinking, well, I actually thought that the best way, but if we do that together, then this will be even better. And that's the kind of magic bit where you actually realize that perspectives are better when they're shared rather than just one person. I've already talked about arriving at consensus is also a way of aligning, and reframing or parking or postponing as appropriate. That's also aligned. Let's align that this will happen. I mean, you can use the alignment in lots of ways, but that way you're closing all of the gaps or putting everything in a place where it can be closed. And there's none of this, what I think it used to be called white space or white noise, where there's just lots of noise in the system and it's just ambiguous and confusing. So ultimately, the process of discussion is about moving people from conflict to being more effective, so that they don't have tunnel vision, they don't have groupthink where they think they're all aligned, but they actually just haven't really explored the perspectives properly, and they're not passively kind of agreeing on this, and then saying yes, but meaning no. What they are doing is genuinely wanting to learn from each other's perspectives, genuinely supporting and challenging themselves and others through the understanding process, trusting the fact that they and themselves have solutions that can be found and different ways of doing things, and that they will commit to them. And if they do, they simply will be more effective. So it's not about looking back in anger, us versus them in the past. It's about looking forward with the we, team first, mutual learning, innovation, finding consensus. So that's ultimately where we're going with this. I'm going to stop just to ask if you've got any reactions at this point, because I've just given you like a bunch of stuff. What are you thinking in terms of, can you imagine yourself in that coach role?
Yeah, I can. Yes, I can. I find it really exciting, actually, having worked with so many different teams. And and some work and some don't. I find the whole concept really exciting. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think with a process and a framework, with the gaps identified, people are scared that they think that, we're going to open the can of worms, it's going to be really, we can't possibly be direct about that. Well, oftentimes we find that worms are actually really much smaller than they thought, and it's not that personal. They just sort it out, and there's only 3 of them anyway. Sometimes it can be quite intense, but surely teams have got to put the issues on the table. I mean, you can dance around them for ages, but it's not going to help anything, I guess, is it?
I guess, you know, I've kind of managed and worked with teams around cultures, and so that stuff that you're talking about is really, really familiar to me, and about that open, honest communication, you know, having the team meetings, the cards on the table, looking at what the issues are, you know, how do the gaps need to be filled, health and social care. I think it's kind of embedded in a lot of what we do, and certainly in the social care side. So it's all stuff that kind of I've been used to doing anyway. And I mean, I'm not coaching teams at the moment. It's only individuals and not many of them. But in my new role, kind of coaching health and social care workers, I think there'll be a lot of this stuff does come up time and time again. So it's a good refresher and a good reminder. It's really good as well to see the research that you've done. It's interesting, isn't it, when people have come up with the similar issues at the bottom. I think a lot of that is as well. So that it's good, it's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that it probably, like a more systemic, diagnostic driven, data driven way of doing alignment probably does apply to the team in the mid-sized organization, where they really do need to get results, and they really do need to know that they've done everything possible to get those results. So that and they can feel that there's confusion, but they don't know why. And if that's the case, they would need a diagnostic like this and a team coach, because otherwise they're just guessing and hoping. And I think that's really where, I suppose, the thorough approach. But you're right, Linda, you're probably doing it all the time at a level that's totally fit for purpose with your groups or people that you speak to already. Dawn, do you have any views to share? You're on mute.
Thank you. No, as I said, this is quite, I suppose it's obvious, but it's also revolutionary. It's revolutionary in its obviousness. You know, somebody who's got a new team and is building a new team and has been solopreneur for a couple of decades, I'm having to go back to that kind of thinking and make sure I don't fall into the trap of making assumptions.
Oops, I think everybody just underestimates how much disconnectedness there actually is when they can't see it, and how problematic that can be. And even when they get to the point where they're bailing themselves out of all of this, like, stuff that was messy to start with, that becomes normal business. And that's when engagement levels start to drop, and working in large organizations becomes hell, because everyone's like, oh God, you know, do we have to do that? I thought we did that last year, or, you know, but you know, weren't they doing it? And that kind of organizational, you know, come on everyone, we really have to get this done, is just awful to work in, isn't it? Why there are so many freelancers these days, I guess. But anyway, I'll just go into the last of the slides before and come back to you in a second. You know, why is this? I really like your quote, Dawn. I'm going to use that if it's all right. It's obvious and it's revolutionary at the same time. But why is that? And I think it's because when people become aware of perspectives that could serve them better. So this is research on shared mental models. People have their own mental models. And when they hear about something that they think, oh, I can use that, their brain will adapt and they'll just take it on, and their mental model will just update. So, and they won't even know it's happening. And some of it's really valuable. It's like, oh, okay, so we won't approach it like this. We'll do it like that. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. They could have gone down an entire rabbit hole for 2 months without that insight, exploring something that didn't quite work. So people will learn and adapt quickly. But when they learn about the views of others and the assumptions in their group, you build more empathy and understanding with people. Now, that sounds really female and really wishy-washy to a lot of people in business, I guess. But if you've got empathy and understanding, you're much more inclined to say, okay, well, I don't agree, but I'm going to back this solution because I see where you're coming from. Whereas if you didn't have that empathy and you were asked to back a decision, you'd think, oh, God, no, I disagree. And then you'd get into this passive agreement. Either you'd say, because you don't have time. Either you'd say, okay, yeah, that's great. And then you'd think, I'm not doing that. So many people doing that in organizations. Or you say, yeah, but, and the negotiation goes on after the decision is made. It's not really agreed at all. That's very, very cumbersome. And then this third piece here is that when groups of people explore new perspectives and options in a respectful environment, and when they do create a better shared reality, it is more actionable and it is more effective, and they can feel it, because they're just like, oh my God, we're going with the flow now, instead of, you know, pushing crap uphill. And so just to sort of sum up, if you like, alignment is, I guess, as a definition, shared meaning between people. We've covered that. It's a group learning process, actually, based on respect and inclusivity. It's how people relate to the strategy as well as how they collaborate to deliver. And that's why I think the concept of alignment is perhaps not as mature as it could be in organizations, because that's not easy to grasp for the top-down thinker, or for the person who still sees individual people with their own separate preferences and doesn't see a shared meaning systemic picture. Alignment is not then people thinking the same thing or people buying into something. It's absolutely not that. So just to round off then, what kind of measurement results have we seen? So we don't just ask questions before a coaching intervention, we ask it afterwards, and then 3 to 6 months later. And the kind of results we would get are this, where the average score on positivity might have been quite high, 75%. But that can go right up when people realize that what they hadn't known and fixed it. Clarity on how to achieve goals. People can kind of feel quite underconfident here, as we saw in the lowest scores there. And the spread of alignment here is quite tight. So it's between 25 and 50%. But then after a workshop, and then 3 to 6 months later, that those should still be going up. But the spread, more importantly, the spread of scores should be getting thinner. And it was wider here. People do go through a bit of a tunnel because they discover things they didn't want to know, or they didn't realize was such hard work. But 3 to 6 months later, they're back to quite a close thing here. But level of team preparedness to succeed. Of course, if they feel terrible at the beginning, you've got loads of wiggle room. But ultimately, it's the same. It's the scores going up and the spread of scores going down. And the same with alignment to the organization vision. So you can get some really dramatic results. And then we also measure 4 behaviors. Now, these can be customized, but in terms of, are they committed to achieving shared goals? We can't measure just after the workshop because they haven't had a chance to observe each other's behavior yet. So you've got to only do the follow-up survey at 3 to 6 months. But what you're really looking out for is the spread of alignment to get smaller again, and the bars to go up. So here the bars go up. Can they participate in a constructive discussion? Have they got a constructive discussion culture? Absolutely crucial. Scores went up there. There's still a bit of people thinking slightly different things, needs to improve. Confidence in team success, positive and equal treatment in team. And that's why these behaviors are so crucial to alignment, because if they don't have those key things, I mean, you know. So that's kind of the end of it. We've got a really great quote here from Amy Edmondson in Psychological Safety, who reviewed Mirror Mirror and said this. So she's really talking about, you know, just allowing people to address issues without judgment or blame and raise them to start with. So I guess I come back to the thing about this being a coaching opportunity. Is there any kind of final comments in the last few minutes? Dawn.
Just on that last slide, I was thinking, as we're building this new team, and obviously we're all very gung-ho and very excited, and retention is obviously the name of the game, and development and alignment, obviously. Is creating that culture of being able to safely give feedback as well. That's really important. That's what I picked up from the last slide.
Yeah, and I think that would be something that you can't dive. That's a sort of skill, I guess, in itself. is useful in an alignment process, definitely. I mean, and if a coach can impart some learning on that skill during the coaching process, I like to think that coaching is a bit of advisory, bit of teaching, bit of consulting, but mainly guiding and steering the participants themselves. But it's all of those things. So yeah, I totally agree. Linda, anything else from you?
I think it's good as well. It's really relevant that later on you're going back and checking out the behaviours. That's really important, because it's one thing to kind of to talk about, you know, what you need to do to go forward. You think everybody's kind of understanding, but it's the behaviours that are ultimately, you know, that you're wanting to change as well. Because if they don't, that's when you can just stay in kind of misalignment, can't you? And just what you were talking about earlier and what I said about kind of poor cultures. So I think that's really good and really relevant that, you know, you're going back later on and just checking out the behaviours. So how have people's behaviours changed as a result? Has what they've learned, has their understanding, has their perception, you know, how's that all been embedded? So I think that's a really good relevant point.
Yeah, thanks.
I really like the fact that it starts very clearly with sort of diagnostic information. So you gather information, and then you've got obviously your kind of KPIs, so you can judge the effectiveness of it. You know, and obviously you've then got the process in the middle that kind of ties the two together. But because it starts with facts and it ends with facts, you know, I think it makes it much easier to honestly to sell the benefits to anybody who's having issues with their teams. You know, it's not us going, it's not woo-woo, it's not kind of, you know, it's not sort of airy-fairy, it's facts. This is what your team are saying, and you know, and we've got proof that at the end of it, this is what the team is going to be measured by, and you know, success factors and things. So I think it's a very strong model.
Yeah, it's really tangible, and it's indisputable as well, because and it's an answer to the kind of frustrating employee survey that collects all this data and doesn't really do much about it. And you know, it's got to be actionable, hasn't it? So that's where the coach comes in. But anyway, we're out of time now, so I appreciate you showing up, and glad you got something out of it, and seem to be positive about it. So I'm going to share your quote, Dawn, if that's all right.
Yes, it's revolutionarily obvious. I think, you know, within the IAPC&M, there are a lot of leadership and corporate and group coaches who either registered or didn't really register this masterclass today, but we'll highlight it in the monthly summary, and it will be on the archive of Grow Your Coaching Business and Skills. So hopefully there will be that drip feed for you. And I've also thought about a couple of people to introduce you to, you know, because it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? We all network like Olympians. So we'll have another discussion. But what I've realized by laying on these masterclasses over the last couple of years is that the impact can come so much later. We get thousands and thousands of people registering, say, for International Coaching Week. And then we hear 6 months down the road of all the things that came out of that. So it's not necessarily just what happened today. So I'm sure, you know, your efforts today in this last hour will touch much more, many more people's lives than just the ones on the call. So thank you, Lindsay. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and sharing that with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe and don't forget to record everything on your CPD logs.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.